Hello everyone, my name is Jeff Miesbauer, Content Manager at Agiloft. Welcome to today's training webinar titled Using and Modifying the Contract Types Table, presented by Agiloft Implementer Rose Booble. As part one of a two-part training series, today we'll discuss the basic concepts of using and modifying the Contract Types Table and how to leverage this versatile table to connect your contract management with critical background tables. We'll dive deeper into this topic on February 10th, so be on the lookout for that. Presentation will be just about 42 minutes, followed by a live Q&A with Rose. Please submit your questions in the appropriate window in the Zoom platform at any time during the presentation. It takes about a minute to queue up the video, so please bear with us as we do that.
Hello everyone, my name is Rose and I'm an implementer with Agiloft, and today I will be speaking to you about the basics of leveraging Agiloft's contract type functions to customize your contract management system. To briefly review what we're going to go over today, first we're going to look at the contract types table, and we'll see the contract types available in our out-of-the-box system and how those interact with the contract records. Next, we'll look at the ways in which the contract type determines aspects of the contract record in their print templates and in the approval workflows. And finally, we're going to look at the extra fields to show, which is a feature that is responsible for the bulk of customization in the way information is entered into various contract types. We will also reserve some time at the end of this session for questions. In addition to this session, which introduces the basics of contract type table and how to utilize its out-of-the-box features and fields, one of my colleagues will also be presenting an advanced session on utilizing the contract types in other ways to provide even greater customizations to your system. If you're interested in that information, please go ahead and look for that after this session. To start off, let's talk a little bit about the contract types table. The contract types table is a very powerful and very versatile table. It creates a link between the contract records and many other background tables and information within the system. The contract type that is selected for a record determines the visibility of select fields within the record. It determines what print templates are available, what approval workflows the contract can move through, as well as any other information specific to that contract type. The contract type is the single most powerful way that you have to customize how your contracts differ from each other in type and feature. So to start, let's go ahead and take a look at the contracts table. This is my contracts table, so let's see what happens when we start a new contract record. I'm going to click New here. And one of the first things that we are asked to select when we have a new contract record is the contract type. The contract type is a drop-down menu, and it seems to be a simple choice field, but we will soon look at where this information comes from, and you'll see that it is much more than a simple choice field. So this is actually a link to the contract type table. And when we select a contract type, we're pulling in a lot more information than we realize. There are some subtle changes when we move from type to type. So let's take a look at the NDA contract type. Scrolling down, I can see that I do not have a contract amount field. If I move over to attachments, I can see that I have a certain number of print templates that I can generate or documents I can generate, and they are all NDA type documents. If I change this to a service contract, that's going to create some subtle changes to my contract form. Moving down, I can see that this contract amount has now appeared. And if I move over to the Attachments tab, I can see that I have a whole new list of documents that can be generated. That is because the print templates that are available and the additional fields that are shown, as well as several other key pieces of information, are all determined by our selection in the contract types field. So now let's move over to the contract types table. Under contract setup, I'll move to contract types, and here I can see some of the contract types that are available in our out-of-the-box system. I have several vendor contracts available, customer service contracts, NDAs, as well as service contracts and IT master agreements. Why don't we go ahead and take a look at one of these agreement types? So let's look at the service contract. On the main tab of the contract type record, I can see that we have several options. One is party type. Now, party type is a field that is going to allow you to sort your contracts by the party. So this is a contract that would be available for customers. I could also make this available for partners, employees, vendors, or other. And that's going to allow you to generate reports and charts and searches based on that contract type. For example, you could generate a report that showed only the customer contracts. So they would show all contracts regardless of contract type, as long as that contract type was a customer contract type. Or you could generate a chart showing the progress for all vendor contracts and show that to a department, to users within a department that deal with vendor contracts. So what this field allows you to do is to be able to sort and create greater levels of specificity in your reporting. We also see that there is a default workflow selected and a default print template. We're going to get into more details on both of these things in just a moment here, but for now let's just take a look at the structure of this. So we can see that our defaults are selected on this page. This is also where we can select if our record even has print templates. If our contract type even has print templates. And moving over, this is where we see the list of all of the available print templates and workflows for this type. Now let's go ahead and take a look a little bit deeper into some of these fields that we saw within the contract type record. The first aspect of contract type that we're going to take a closer look at is going to be our print templates. Print templates are documents that can be used to generate a document from within a record, and that document will be populated with data from the record. For example, we may want to generate a formal contract document from a service contract record. When we generate the document, key information such as the company name, contract start and end dates, contract amount, and so forth are all populated in the document. Here we can see an example of a print template, and we can see the fields in here that start with the dollar symbol, and those fields are what are going to be replaced with the specific information from our record. There are two aspects to the print templates that are available through the contract type record. So the contract type record includes a list of print templates that are available for that contract type, so we can associate multiple print templates with a single contract type. For example, a services contract may have a statement of work and an overall master agreement, or it might have amendments. Each of these can be a separate print template type and can all be associated with a single contract type. We also saw on the first tab of that contract record, the contract type record, that we were able to select a default print template. This is typically the most frequently used print template for the record type, and when we look at the contract record in a moment, we will see where this selection comes into play. If you have questions on the creation of print templates and adding them to the system, we have another seminar available that is a recorded session about print templates that can provide more information on that. So if this is something that you're interested in looking at in greater detail, I highly encourage you to reach out to somebody to be connected with that session once we are done here. Now let's take a look at the system again, and we're going to take a look at one of our contract types and the print templates that are associated with it. So I'm going to move back to my service contract, And first I'm going to go over to the Print Templates and Workflows tab. I can see here a list of all of the print templates that have been made available for this particular contract type. If I want to add a print template from in my Print Templates table, I can simply click on this orange magnifying glass symbol, and that will take me to a list of all of the print templates available. So let's say we want to go ahead and add this IT Master Services Agreement. I would check the box marked next to it and then click Import/Append. And now my IT Master Services Agreement from Agiloft is available as a print template for this contract type. If I move back to the main tab of the contract type record, my default print template, I can select from this drop-down list. And if I want to view any of these print templates, I can do so either from the print template table by clicking on the template file, which will allow me to view or download the file or to directly edit it from this table if I have permissions to do so. So if I click on View, it will open in Word, and I can now see this print template, and I can see these tags that are responsible for pulling the metadata from the record. Or if I simply want to view the current default print template, I can also do so from this main tab by clicking the Print Template file. That will download the print template, which I can then open and again view those tags and view the details of the record that I'm associating with this contract type. Let's take a look at this in action in the contract table. So I'm going to move up to my contract table and I'm going to pick a service contract since that was the contract type that I was just editing. Moving to the Attachments tab along the top, I will scroll down to Print Template to Generate. So I can see here that the value for my print template to generate is automatically set to my default value from my contract type record. And if I use this drop-down menu, I can see that my IT Master Services Agreement from Agiloft has been added to my list of available print templates since I added it to the list in the contract type. Now what if I want to remove it from that list? Well, let's move back to the contract type table. I will open my service contract again, move back to Print Templates and Workflows. I will once again check the box next to the record, and this time to remove it from the list, I will simply click Unlink from the action bar. Now, this print template type is no longer available for this contract. If I move back to contracts, any that are service contracts, which I can see from my title, will no longer have that document available to generate. Now that we have discussed print templates, let's go ahead and take a look at another key piece of information that is pulled in with the contract type. Approval workflows determine who is responsible for reviewing and approving the contract record. So these workflows consist of a series of approval steps which can be required for every contract of that type or which can be conditional based on values within the contract. For example, a vendor license agreement might have an approval step based on the discount amount in the contract, where if the discount goes over a certain dollar amount or over a certain percent, that agreement is sent for approval with a finance director. Or maybe a finance director needs to approve service contracts whose contract value is over a certain dollar amount. However the workflows are set up, the workflows available, and the default workflow are all determined again from the contract type. Once again, we have multiple contract workflows available based on contract type. And from these multiple workflows, we're going to select a default workflow, and that is going to determine which approval workflow is automatically selected in a record, where the full list of workflows available is going to determine the other options that the user can shift to from the default value. Let's move back into the live system again, and we'll take a look at how these workflows are managed based on contract type. We will start by moving back into the contract type table, and once again I'll open my service contract type by clicking Edit. On the Print Templates and Workflows tab, I can see a list of all of the workflows that are available for this contract type. Very similar to the print templates, I can add an available workflow by clicking on the orange magnifying glass symbol, locating the workflow I want to add, checking the box, and marking Import/Append. Now I can see that this workflow has been added for this specific contract type. Again, very similar to print templates, I can move to the contract type main tab, and I can select my default workflow title. Here I can see a list of all of the workflows that I've made available, including that legal approval that I just added. So now let's take a look at this in the contracts table. Moving to contracts and opening up my service contract record, I'm going to look at the approvals table. So on this approvers tab, I can see my default workflow has been automatically selected for me. And from here, I can select other workflows using the drop-down menu, including that legal approval that I just added to this workflow. Let's say that I want to remove that legal approval option from my available workflows. To do so, I'm going to move back to the contract types table, go back into service contracts, move over to print templates and workflows, and once again I'll check the box next to legal approval, and I'll click Unlink. Now the legal approval workflow is no longer available for users to select when they're selecting workflows for the service contract type. If I move back into my contract, on the Approvals tab, refresh the values, and now I can see that that approval type is no longer available. So now I will select from my available approval types before selecting Create Approvals and starting the approval process. How these individual approvals and their overall workflows are created is another topic that is being presented by one of my colleagues, but for now we at least have the tools to select the workflows and to ensure that they are applied to the correct contract types. Moving on to our last topic of items pulled over from the contract type record is the extra fields to show list. So this is a multi-choice field whose value determines which fields are shown in the contracts linked to this contract type. Contract amount is a great example of a popular field to have appear in some contract type but not others. For example, contract amount is typically not applicable to NDA records, but it can be very important in a vendor license agreement. The extra fields to show is a choice list within the contract type field. It is a multi-choice field whose value determines what is shown in the contract. And today we're going to take a look at how to utilize this field, how to adjust the visibility of fields within the contract record based on the selections in this field, and how to add values to this field. So let's move back into the system, and we're going to take a look at the extra fields to show setup. So I'll go back into my service contract record type as well again. And I see here an extra fields to show list. And right now, this is showing covered locations, contract amount, optional clauses, and governing clause. If I select the magnifying glass to the right of the field, I can adjust which items are shown in contracts of this specific contract type. Let's say, for example, that I don't want to show the contract amount in my service contract. I can remove that from the list, hit OK, and save. And now when I move back to contracts and go to my service contract, I'll see that even though earlier my contract amount showed for a service contract, now that field is hidden. It was right below fiscal year here. We can add values to our extra fields to show list as well. So right now we can see that this list is somewhat limited, and it does include a few extra fields down here that we can use to adjust the visibility of various fields within the contract. But what if we want another specific named field to be present in this list? To do so, we're actually going to look at the setup of the contract type table. So under contract types, I'm going to go to setup contract types. And then I'll move over to the fields tab. From here, I'm going to find my extra fields to show field, and I'll click edit. So my choice list is the contract type fields to show choice list, and I can edit this choice list. Here I can see all of the items that are currently on my list, and I'm going to go ahead and add a new item. And my new item is going to be hourly rate. This will be an hourly rate for work done on a specific contract. And I'm going to add it at the top of the list, so above my covered locations. Then I click finish. Now I can see that I have this hourly rate extra field to show available. And I click finish. On that choice list, the choice list is refreshed. I'll click finish on the field is refreshed, and now I'll click finish once more to save the changes to the table. Now when I move back to contract types and open my service contract type to edit, I select my magnifying glass and I can see that hourly rate is now available to select. Let's go back and add the contract amount to my service contracts. Now, moving back into my contract, I should see the contract amount. And there it is, my contract amount field. Now let's look at a contract that is not the contract, a service contract. Let's go ahead and look at a non-disclosure agreement record like I have down here at record 20002. Since the contract amount is not shown for non-disclosure agreements in our out-of-the-box setup, I can see that my contract amount does not show. However, I do see these other two fields. I see the renewal rate % increase, and I also see the renewal value. Now, those are fields that I do not want to have show, because those are fields that do not make sense in a contract that doesn't have a contract amount. So, how am I going to hide these fields from showing when I'm in contracts that don't have a contract amount? The answer to this question lies in the setup of how the extra fields to show selection affects the visibility of fields within the contracts table. We have some options here. So first, let's take a look at how the contract amount visibility is set up to only show in contract types that want that field shown. So moving back into the system, Now I'm going to move to the contracts table setup. So under contracts, I'll go down to setup contracts. And I'm going to move over to fields. Let's look at our contract amount field and see how that corresponds to the value that is selected in the extra fields to show. I found contract amount, my currency field, and I'll go ahead and click edit. Visibility is determined under the options tab, so I'll move over to the options tab. And I can see that this field is only visible when the contract type extra fields to show includes the contract amount. So I can see that this choice list has been pulled in, and we'll take a look at the link that pulls that choice list in a couple of minutes here. But this particular field is set to only show when the contract type extra field to show contains the value contract amount. So from here, I have a few options. And let's take a look at what those options are. So, my first option is that I can associate multiple fields within the contract with the same extra field to show value. There is nothing stopping me from doing this. So let's take a look at how we would set it up using this method. Moving back into the contract setup, first I'm actually going to go back into my contract and make sure of what fields it is that I want to hide. So scrolling down, I can see that I have my renewal rate percent increase and my renewal value. So those are the two fields that I want to always be associated with the contract amount. So I'll go back into Setup Contracts and move over to Fields. Here's my renewal value, and here I can see my renewal rate percent increase. Let's go into Renewal Value, and on the Options tab, I'm going to go ahead and make the visibility of this field conditional. I'll add a condition, and I want the contract type extra fields to show to contain the value contract amount. Because if my contract amount isn't shown, I'm not interested in my renewal value. So I want those to be shown together. And I'll click Finish. Now I will do the same to the renewal rate percent increase. Again, moving to the Options tab. I'm going to scroll down to Visibility. I will add a condition that I only want this to be shown when the contract type. I will set a condition that I only want this to show when the contract type extra fields to show contains the value contract amount. I'll once again click Finish and then Finish again. So now those two fields have been set so that they will only show when the contract amount is selected to show from in the contracts table record. So when that contract type record shows contract amount, then it will also show these other fields. Let's take a look at my contracts and see if this worked. So moving back into my non-disclosure agreement, I scroll down and I can see that those other fields related to the contract amount are no longer shown. And if I go into a contract that does show the contract amount, such as a service contract, those fields are shown. Now, I mentioned that there were two ways of doing this, so let's take a look at the other way. So, the advantage of using this first method is that We are not cluttering up our fields to show list, and we're able to group fields to make them visible or invisible together. The downside though is that the fields can't be shown or hidden separately. So you have to be 100% sure that you're never going to want to show one of the fields and not the others for a contract type. So our other option is going to be to add values to our extra fields to show for these new fields. Let's take a look at what that would look like. Moving back into the system, I'm going to go back to contract types, and I want to add my two fields to my contract types extra fields to show. Let me move back into contracts one more time, and we're going to take a second look at the fields to make sure that we add them with the correct name. So again, it is my renewal rate percent increase and my renewal value. So moving back into contract types, I'm going to go to Setup Contract Types and move over to Fields. Once again, I'm going to go to the Extra Fields to Show section. And I'm going to edit this choice list. So I want to add a new item to this choice list called Renewal Rate Percent Increase. And I'm going to go ahead and put it right under the contract amount, since it is still related to that value. And then I'll add another extra field to show, which is the renewal value. And once again, I'll put that right under my contract amount with my other financial fields. So now I can see that my two new fields have values on this extra field to show list. I can click Finish to save the changes to this field, and then click Finish at the top to save the changes to the contract type table. Moving back into my contract types, I'll go ahead and edit the values in my services agreement, or my service contract type rather. And I'm going to select renewal value and renewal rate percent increase and add those to the list. Keep in mind, with a multi-choice list like this, you can select multiple options by holding down Control and clicking, or holding down Command and clicking, depending on the operating system you're working with. Now I'm going to save my changes and move back into my contracts table. Now my setup is not done, because remember those two new fields that I selected? Right now their visibility is dependent on the contract amount value in that extra fields to show list, because that's how we had them set up. So we're going to go back into Setup Contracts, go to Fields, and once again find our fields. So here's my renewal rate percent increase. On the Options tab, I'm going to change its conditional visibility. Right now it's set to show if the extra fields to show includes contract amount, but I actually want to change it so that it is the renewal rate percent increase. And I'm going to do the same for the renewal value. I will change it so that it shows when the extra fields to show includes the value renewal value. Now the visibility of the contract amount is no longer tied to the visibility of these other two new fields. This does mean that I will have to add more values when I'm selecting the extra values to show for a new contract type that wants to show all three of these fields, but it means that I'll be able to show the fields independently of each other. Let's first check and make sure that our fields show. So going into a service contract, I can see by scrolling down that my contract amount, my renewal rate percent increase, and my renewal value all show. And if I go into a contract type that should not include that information, I can see that none of the three fields show. Now let's go back to our contract types and let's look at our service contract 2. So this is an alternate service contract type. And here I want to ensure that contract amount is selected, but renewal value and renewal rate percent are not. And I can see that is the case. So let's look now at a contract record that uses this service contract 2 type. I see that I have one right here. Moving down, I can see that my contract amount is shown, but that contract amount is no longer tied to those other renewal amount fields. So those fields are not shown below contract amount. With the way I had it set up initially, well, the setup was easier. Those three fields were all tied together, so to show one, we had to show all of them for that contract type. Now, by setting it up as separate values in the extra fields to show list, we are able to distinguish and create greater specificity in our contract types, where we can show one of those values without showing the others. Now that we have looked at how to add print templates and workflows to your contract type and gone over the setup for the extra fields to show, let's take a look at how all of these values are pulled into a contract record. So, as a general overview of how this is pulled in, this is done through a linked set that moves from the contract type to the contract record. The link allows the user to determine the contract type, and in pulling over the contract type, and in making that decision, the print template list, default print template, the workflow list, default workflows, the extra fields to show, and the party type field that we looked at earlier are all populated in the record. Because these are all in the same linked set, not in separate linked fields, selecting the contract type populates the rest of these values based on the information in that contract type record. Let's look at this link in our system. We're in the contracts table, so I'm going to move to set up contracts, and then I'll move over to fields. And I'll scroll down to the contract type. Here is my contract type link set, and I can see what values are pulled in. So again, my contract type is pulled in, and that is the one that I select. My default print template is pulled in, my contract type default workflow, my default workflow title, my extra fields to show, whether or not this record has print templates is pulled in, the ID of my contract type, and then my contract type party type as well, which was that sorting field we looked at earlier. Keep in mind that since the contract type is serving as a link from the contract record to other tables within the system, many of these fields that are being pulled in are in themselves links to other tables. So our print templates are stored in an entirely separate print template table. Our workflows are stored in a workflow table. And these values are pulled in via the contract type table. The contract type being the qualifier that tells our contract record what values to pull in. So this is our setup from the contract side. Let's go ahead and look at these fields on the contract type side. So cancel out of here and move down to set up contract types. So if I look at these fields, like the print templates, I can see that these are all linked from another table. My default print template is a link to the print template table. My default workflow, that's a link to the approval workflow table. So all of these are linked to tables that are separated by 2 degrees of separation from the contract table and are all pulled in by this incredibly versatile linking table that we call contract types. To quickly review what we covered today, we first looked at the contract types table and the contract types that are available in our out-of-the-box configuration. We reviewed the purpose and the importance of print templates and the approval workflows and how to make them available or restricted for contract types. We also reviewed how to select default print templates and default workflows for a contract type. We learned about the strength and the flexibility of the extra fields to show, and how to adjust the list of fields available, and how to make fields in the contract table dependent on the selection that we make in the contract type extra fields to show. We discussed making similar fields dependent on the same value and using that to reduce the amount of setup work, and we also looked at the method with slightly more setup but more flexibility in use, where we add a value to the extra fields to show list for each field that we want to affect in the contracts table. Finally, we looked at the link set that pulls this all together and discussed how linking all the fields in a single set allows the record to pull in all these pertinent values and settings based on a single selection from the user. Remember, there is an advanced session for this topic, so if you are interested in learning more about the contract types and how to use custom fields and flag fields to create greater specificity and sorting ability within your records, please check that out from one of my colleagues. Thank you so much for joining us today. I hope this has given you some valuable insight into the ways Agiloft can be effectively and quickly customized to work for your business practice, and I hope that now you feel like you have the tools you need to tackle the contract types table. Thanks so much.
Let's now open it up for Q&A. I'll start the one we always get. Will the recording and slides be available after the webinar? Yes, we will post this training session on our website, on our events page, and we'll also send out a link to both the slides and the recording in an email in 24 to 48 hours, so be on the lookout for that. Rose, seeing some questions here. What is the best practice when it comes to figuring out how many contract types you need?
Right, great, thank you. So in general, you're going to want to have a contract type for any contracts that will use the same or similar print templates and approval workflows and which will show the same fields. So I found that we often start with the template and work from there. We might look at the contract templates that a company wants to use moving forward and determine which of them correspond to different sets of fields that should be shown or hidden, and which of them correspond to which approval workflows. If they correspond pretty closely between approval workflows and print templates, then we should make those a distinct contract type. However, we want to be careful because if you make your contract types too specific, this can damage the user experience. So for example, if a user is in trying to select a contract type from a list of 50 plus contract types, that's not a great user experience, right? So we want to make sure that we have enough specificity to drive that conditional visibility of fields. But if you have contract types that can be grouped together, that use either the same or similar print templates, then that can help keep you from getting too far into the weeds with the contract types. I really don't like to do more than, in a smaller project, I really don't like to do more than 20 or 25 contract types.
All right, that makes sense. We also had a question coming through chat. Do workflows always have to be determined based on contract type versus, say, dollar value of a contract?
Okay, yeah, this is a great question. So The approval workflow that is available to select within the contract record can be based on multiple criteria. We typically do want to retain some tie to contract type, but we can add other filters as well to the list of workflows that are available. However, a more common solution to this question is to include individual approval templates within the workflow that only run based on contract conditions. So, for example, I could have a template within my workflow that says that I only want to generate this approval step when the contract amount is over a certain dollar amount. So we can filter those available approval workflows, but more common would to be to make some of the steps within the workflow conditionally dependent on contract values.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Um, if you have any questions, be sure to enter them into the Q&A. Let's see, we got another one here. Do contract types have to be added during implementation, or can they be added after the fact?
Yeah, you can absolutely add contract types to a live system. So I think you heard me say once or twice in the presentation, I love to say this, that contract type is one of the best ways to customize the experience of the system. And it's not only because they drive so much of the fields in the workflow, but also because they're a really approachable part of customizing a system. Right? So it's just creating a new record in the contract type table. And in that way, it's easy to go in and add a contract type um, after the fact. So if you're using a system, you've already gone live, you've already been through your whole implementation project, and you realize that you have more contract types that need to be added, those can absolutely be added after the fact. Obviously, it's a more complex process if you've built more complex functionality into your system. But just with our out-of-the-box build, adding contract types after the fact does not interfere with current contract types at all.
Perfect. Yeah. A question from Nuno. Is there a repository where more of these webinars can be found? We really appreciate your feedback here. This was a great presentation by Rose. All of our training webinars can be found at our website on our events page, but they can also be found on our YouTube channel. So we've got some thought leadership, contract management skills, webinars, and also all of these training webinars are available. The recordings are available for free. So yeah, just I guess you can either whatever you prefer on YouTube or on our website. But we'll continue to post these, and we've got a whole new a whole new lineup of these coming. Yeah. Well, don't forget about YouTube. We are on YouTube, so please check that out. There's a lot of other good content, including new release webinars and things like that. If you're just kind of getting into the Agiloft, you can see what we have coming in the roadmap and what new features we have this year. I think we have time for maybe one more. I see one in the chat from Sandra. If we change the fields within a contract template or workflow, how does this affect our current contracts?
Yeah, that's a great question. So if you make changes to a contract template, so like a print template, or to how a workflow is structured, if the contract document has already been generated, it will not be affected by those changes. So if I have a contract that already went through its workflow, it went through negotiation, and it's already been signed, changing my contract template will not affect the documents attached to that contract. It will also not affect the approval steps for a record for which approvals have already been generated. So whether or not those approvals have already been completed, if approvals have been generated, then changing that approval workflow will not change that contract's approvals.
Great. Okay. Another question. If an employee is no longer with the company and you wish to remove them from a workflow or being a contract watcher, what is the best way to simply make them inactive within their employee user profile?
Right. So if this employee is specified in something like an approval workflow, then you would want to go into that approval workflow and reassign that approval step so that future approvals that are generated are not generated with this, with references to this employee. So we're not sending approvals to somebody who's no longer in the system, right? Um, if you have them as a contract watcher, so somebody who can view contracts but doesn't necessarily interact with them, right, you would want to make sure that their user record was inactive, want to make sure that they're not able to log into the system, and you could also always remove their group so that they no longer have permission to access records. And yeah, so this actually does bring up a good point though. When you're assembling these approval record or these approval workflows rather, you want to have them refer to an objective role in the system whenever possible, not to an individual. So the best way to fix this problem is to not have this problem, right? Is to, when you're setting up your approval workflows, say, I'm going to assign them, not I'm going to assign them to this specific person in the company, but I'm going to assign them to the person who fills this role in the company. So then when somebody leaves and somebody else steps into that role, the transition will be as seamless as possible with how your workflows are assigned, since it's being assigned to the person who has that role and can just automatically complete that new assignment.
Perfect. Yeah, that's a great point. Maybe have time for one more. If my contract type has more than one template, how will I know which one to use?
Right. So that can be a little confusing. I've seen some systems sometimes where people come in and they're going to select their print template to generate their document, and there's a lot of options there. So this is where developing a best practice when it comes to clear and descriptive titles is really going to be your best friend. So for example, if I had two templates that all applied to service agreement, I wouldn't want to call them service agreement type 1 and service agreement type 2, right? Unless that corresponded to some internal best practice, which doesn't seem super likely. I might call them instead a service agreement mutual indemnity and service agreement one-way indemnity. So really define within the title what makes them different from each other. So taking the time to create kind of a sensible, approachable best practice when it comes to titling can make a huge difference in user experience for your system.
Perfect. Thanks, Rose, and thanks again for your time and in producing this. And it looks like we've had a lot of good questions, and we appreciate everyone's time and feedback here. Just a quick heads up: we will be hosting an advanced session on the contract types table on February 10th, and we will send out a link to all attendees who want to. Just to make sure that you're aware of that and that you can sign up for that one if you're interested. And for those of you who don't know, our full webinar series is available at our homepage at agiloft.com. Next up in our series is part 2 of our contract metrics series. It'll focus on advanced metrics you can track to get the most value from your contract management system. It's going to be a great session. We hope to see you there, and thanks again, everyone.